Hi everyone, it's Ruth. Today in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about monoprinting. Now, monoprinting is very similar to monotype printing, which we did in another video. The big difference is that a monotype is a one-off print. A monoprint is a possible variation in a series. So even though they both are one-of-a-kind prints, mono meaning one, they're one-of-a-kind prints, that monoprint has that variation. And so what do I mean? Well, here's an example. So in these two images here, I have the same print, that same stencil that I have, that leaf print, but there's a variation in this series, right? It's a series of two, but you see it's different paper, there's different color background, there's different placement. So even though it's the same stencil doing the same print, there's a variation. So these are monoprints, right? And so what we're going to be doing in this video focuses on opportunity for variation. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about supplies. Our first supply, as always, is going to be our illustrated instruction. So we're going to be doing the one that says monoprinting. And just like all our other illustrated instructions, it goes through a list of supplies at the top, and then that process is laid out step by step. Of course, in this video, I'll be guiding us through that process today, but know that if you enjoy this process, you can follow along and keep this recipe so you can repeat it and share it as often as you want. So go ahead and pull out those illustrated instructions. We're going to be following along with those. The next thing we need is a sheet of copy paper. Now, if you don't have copy paper, a really good alternative is like sketchbook paper, notebook paper. You want something that's kind of thin. We're going to be using this to make our stencil today. So go ahead and pull out a piece of copy paper. I will say, if you don't have copy paper handy, the welcome packet that came in the kit has copy paper in it, and you can use one of those pages for your stencil today. But go ahead and pull out that copy paper. The next supply that we need is going to be our printing paper. And so if you have the kit, you'll have a little notebook or sketchbook that has nice paper in there. Typically, when we're doing a print, the smoother the surface of the paper, the better it is for printing. It has a smoother, a cleaner transfer of pigment, right? However, for the process we're doing today, any paper will work. And I do mean any paper. I'll demo how to do it with sketch paper, but I also want to say you can do it with scraps too. So this paper, these papers I have right here, this is the scrap paper that I was using to clean my brayer before I washed it. And I think it's got a really nice color background. This is a jelly print that the image didn't turn out, but it could be a good background, right? A watercolor that I wasn't happy with for what I was doing, but it would be perfect for a good background, right? Printed paper, even book pages, any kind of paper, watercolor, copy paper, mixed media paper, newspaper, any paper will really work for our process today. So go ahead and pull out whatever paper you want to use and have that handy. I'm going to go ahead and pull out a few pieces of my sketch paper and have that set up and ready to go. The next thing we need is going to be our brayer. Again, this is kind of the main tool of the printmaker. We've used it in every one of our printmaking processes, and we'll continue to use it today. This is how we're going to transfer that pigment from our paint plate to our template. So go ahead and pull out that brayer. The next thing we need is a sheet of plexiglass. Now, if you have the kit, you have a small piece of plexiglass that came in it. You can use that. One of the things that I have done before is gone to the dollar store and bought a couple of their frames, their cheap frames, and used the glass or acrylic that came in that. And so that's a pretty inexpensive way to get different size plexiglass. Now, for what we're doing today, this small piece is perfect. So go ahead and pull that plexiglass out. And then the next thing we need is going to be our block printing ink. We'll be using this for a process today. Block printing ink is really great. It's a little slow when it comes to its drying time, so it gives us a little extra time to work with it. And it's a thick pigment. And so you can use acrylic paint for this process, but you want to make sure you're not using a runny acrylic paint. You want something that's like a heavy body that has a thickness to it. And so that's why that block printing ink is better than acrylic, but acrylic will work. So go ahead and pull that pigment out. Now, the next thing we need is going to be preparing our space. So I share every week, I work off a piece of foil. It helps me contain my mess. And so if you have a piece of foil, wax paper, disposable tablecloth, even a tray, newspaper, that helps. Well, just kind of protect our space. Our block printing ink is easy to clean up because it's water-based. So you can clean up your mess pretty easily, but it's just nice to have that space protected. I also, every time I work with paint or pigment, dye, any kind of pigment, really, I always wear an apron. It's always good to protect our body as well. So wearing clothes you don't mind getting a little messy, or an apron, is a great way to kind of protect your body. If you get pigment on your hands, know that it will come off with a little soap and water. Again, because this pigment is water soluble, it comes off pretty easily with hand soap or dish soap. Okay. And then the last thing we need to kind of prepare our space is to have either a tray or a piece of foil. I'm going to be using an extra piece of foil to just kind of hold my pigment, right? You can use a paper plate or wax paper. We're mostly putting the pigment on our plexiglass, but it's good to have a space kind of protected, so if there is an overflow, it doesn't get all over the place. So I'm going to be using a piece of foil underneath my plexiglass today. All right, so let's talk about our process for just a second. If we look at our illustrated instructions, we'll just kind of walk through our steps. That first step, we're going to be putting that block printing ink on that plexiglass. We're rolling our brayer across it to get a nice even coat. We want a thin layer, a really thin layer. So earlier when I talked about the best pigment for this process is a thick pigment, it's true. We want that thick pigment, but we want a really thin layer of that pigment. And so once we get that thin layer on our brayer, we'll roll it across our copy paper, and I'll talk about the copy paper in just a moment. But then we'll place that copy paper ink side down onto our printing paper very carefully, and then draw our design. Right? And as we're drawing that design, wherever our pencil or pen pushes, that's where that print is going to show up. Right? So we're tracing that stencil on the copy paper, and we're creating that print that way. Right? All right. So let's walk through our process together. The first thing that I do whenever doing this type of monoprint is to prepare my template. Now, remember I said our stencil, our template, is going to be made on that copy paper today. So what I'm going to do is just make my copy paper a little smaller. I'm going to fold it in half and then cut it. This will just make it a little easier for me to manage, and it gives me a second paper, so if I want to do another stencil, I have the paper for it. So once we get our paper ready, the size, our template, our copy paper ready, it's good to go ahead and get a pencil or a pen. And I always recommend doing like a dull pencil. We don't want it super sharp to kind of poke through, but just something that's slightly dull. I don't know if that's easy to see. A duller pencil. And we'll draw our design. So this is a great opportunity to trace as well. So if you don't want to draw freehand, it's completely okay. Maybe you have an image that you want to trace on your copy paper. Do that. Maybe you have a flower in a magazine, or a simple silhouette, clip art that you found that you want to trace and do. Definitely do that. This is the time to create our image, right? And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and draw the image that I want to trace today. And so I'm going to draw some art supplies. I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a little paintbrush and a pencil. And this type of process we can get some fine lines, right? We can get some detail in there. And so you see, I'm just kind of drawing out a simple design here, not getting too fancy. Drawing my pen, my pencil, and my paintbrush. And so this is what I'm going to use as my template for today. Okay? So after you get your stencil, right? After you get your design on that copy paper, we're going to start adding that pigment. Now, I want to say it's always good to have everything prepped before you pull out your pigment. Even though that block printing ink takes a little longer to dry, it's good to have your design figured out before you pull that pigment out. So you just have as much time as you can for the print. So what I'm going to do is kind of set this aside. I'm going to pull my block printing ink out, and I'm going to put a large blueberry sized dollop on my plate here. Right? No, a large blueberry. So once I get that on my plexiglass, I'm going to take my brayer and just roll it across. Now again, I want a nice thin layer of pigment. So I'm going to take my time and just make sure that my brayer gets covered, right? We want a nice even coat. And you'll see as I'm doing it, I'm brushing everything across my plexiglass, but you can see I'm kind of messy. And so it's good for me to always have like a piece of foil or newspaper underneath. But again, we want a nice thin coat here. All right. So once you have that nice thin coat across your brayer, again, we don't want a thick coat. We want a nice thin coat. What I'm going to do is take my paper, right, my copy paper that I have my drawing on, my template, and I'm going to turn it over, right? So I'm flipping my drawing so it's facing down, and I'm on the back of my copy paper, right? So my image is facing down, and the back of my paper is facing me. Now, the back of the paper is what we're going to ink up, right? And so we're not putting ink on our drawing because we're going to be tracing that drawing for our print. We want the ink to be on the back. And so I'm going to take my brayer and just roll it across. And you can see it's a pretty thin coat, and that's what we want. We want that thin coat. We don't want a super thick layer. And it may take a moment. Just rolling it out. One of the things I want to point out here is that I'm not covering the whole backside of my paper. I'm just covering that image, right? And so I just want that thin coat. All right. So you can see with my drawing here, my copy paper, I have my drawing on one side and I have my pigment on the back of it. This is important, right? That drawing is on one side of the copy paper. The pigment is on the back. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and take my printing paper, here, and I'm going to lay my copy paper ink side down on the paper. So I'm going to flip it and lay it down. Right? So my drawing is facing me, and you'll see that ink is touching my printing paper, right? I'm not pressing it into it. I'm not rubbing it. I'm gently setting it on top. And so then my next step is to trace. So I have my design here. I'm just going to take my pencil and draw over what I've already drawn. Drawing my paintbrush. Drawing my pencil. And then drawing my pen. And I'm pressing firmly, right? And just making sure I'm covering each space, right? I'm doing that with my pencil. Now I wasn't pressing the paper. I was just kind of holding it in place. Right? So when I lift up my copy paper, you can see my print, right? It transferred. And so this is why we want that ink on the back side of our paper, right? So this is our design. Once we have that pigment on the back, wherever we trace is going to transfer that pigment to our printing paper, right? So there are a couple things I want to talk about right here. First, anytime you do this type of printing, you're going to get transfer outside of your design. And so what I mean by that is you'll see there's some little bits of pigment in the background. Know that that's okay. That's part of what makes this type of printing the type of printing it is, right? It makes it what it is. But if you start to find that you have lots of that pigment in the background, what that means is either you were pressing it or we had too much pigment on our paper. Now, as a reminder, we need a thin coat, a really thin coat of that pigment, block printing ink. We don't want thick. We want a very thin coat, and that kind of helps with that transfer. So I did this on regular sketch paper. Looks great, I think. And now I'm going to do a little demo on how to do it with scrap paper, right? With other paper. So this design that I did here, I'll be able to use this over and over again. It's good to have it on thin paper. I've tried it with like thicker paper or watercolor paper, and the image doesn't transfer as well. And so doing that thinner paper, like the copy paper, is better for a template, for making the template. So what I'm going to do is ink up my template again, ink up that copy paper. So I'm going to add just a little more of that block printing ink. Again, we don't want a whole lot. We want a nice thin coat. So I'm just going to kind of layer that up. Roll my brayer across. Right? We want a nice thin coat. And then I'm going to roll that brayer across my paper, inking up that same space. Okay. Once you get that nice thin coat, it's ready to print. So I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to pull out this jelly print. I had an image on here that didn't turn out at all, but I really liked the way the colors interacted, so I kept it. Well, actually, mostly because I'm a borderline hoarder. I didn't want to get rid of it. I wanted to find a way to use it again. And so doing this type of print is a great way to use those scrap papers, right? So I'm going to print on top of this paper today, this jelly print. So just like I did last time, I'm going to take my design, ink side down. Remember, my drawing is on top and the ink is on the back of that drawing, right? And I'm just going to lay it on top of my print here. Okay. I'm not pressing, I'm not rubbing, I'm just holding it in place. And then with my pencil, I'm just going to draw my design again. So drawing exactly where those lines already are. Not doing anything super fancy. Tracing those lines. One thing that might help is I'm just using a pencil over and over again. But it might help if you had like a different, like a color pencil that you were doing, or like a Sharpie, so you can see where you've drawn before. And just so you're kind of making sure that all your lines get drawn. Right, so I've drawn my piece again. Now that I'm done with that, I'll very carefully lift it up. You see my drawing has transferred. And so we have that really nice print. Yeah. Now, again, you can use this template over and over again. Even when it dries, you can add more ink to it and use it again. We want to make sure we're using like a pen or a dull pencil to do that kind of tracing, because we don't want to tear the paper. But this, like I said, you'll be able to use it over and over again. Let's say I've got this one that I made a few days ago. Here, this is an old template that I've drawn on colored on the copy paper. I can use this even though I haven't used it in a couple days, even though that ink is dry, I can still use this to print. All I need to do is add that layer of pigment, right, to the background. And again, we don't need a whole lot of pigment, we just need enough to cover that image. And then I can take like this background I have here, take this background, and just like I did with the other ones, this was my old template. I can flip it over so the template, the design is facing me and the ink is facing the paper, right? And then take my paper or my pencil and just trace that design, right? And like I said, this is a template that I used several days ago, and that pigment was dried on the back. I can still use it. I can save it again and still use it. Once you do that drawing, you lift it up and you've got that nice transfer, right? So even though this is something I used several days ago, I can still use it today. So it's like a template you can always go back to. And as I was saying before, like you can make, even though it's that same design, you can vary how you print it. And so this design I showed in the very beginning on a plain piece of copy paper or of watercolor paper, sorry. And then on another, the same design on watercolor paper that had pigment on it. And then this one, just regular scrap paper. I have it on there too. Even though it's that same image, there's a variation in where I place it, the type of paper I use, the color I use. And so I have this really wonderful leaf series. All right, everyone. Well, I hope this printing process has been fun and enjoyable. It's always enjoyable for me to share these different processes with you all. Happy printing, everyone, and we'll see you soon.